The first mistake was thinking they were myths. The second was waking them up. The third was underestimating what would happen next. It began when the Varric, a proud empire that had conquered dozens of worlds, ignored the warnings left by those who came before them. Across the ruins of forgotten civilizations, among the wreckage of planets burned clean by unseen wrath, a single message had been scrawled in every language that had ever dared to reach beyond their own star. Never wake the humans. For centuries the warning stood unchallenged. The ancient galactic record spoke of an age when something had moved among the stars, an empire that had risen and then suddenly, inexplicably, vanished. There were no ruins, no remnants, only warnings left by those who had come too close. It was assumed they had simply collapsed, as all great powers eventually did. Civilizations rose, waned, and fell into dust. The humans had been no different, but the Varric had grown arrogant. They were the undisputed rulers of the known galaxy, their fleets unmatched, their technology centuries ahead of any challenger. When their long-range scouts detected an uncharted system filled with ruined space stations and a planet scarred by ancient war, they saw an opportunity. The humans had left something behind. The excavation teams arrived on the barren world, a place long since abandoned. Structures unlike anything in the known galaxy stood silent beneath the cold sky. Towers of black metal stretched toward the heavens, their purpose unknown. Machines lay dormant, untouched by time, powered by something beyond understanding. And in the heart of it all, they found the chambers, vast, stretching for miles, buried beneath the surface. Each one held a figure, frozen in a sleep so deep even the most advanced scans barely registered a flicker of life. They were humanoid, though taller than the average Varric, broader, their frames heavy with muscle. Their faces were still, their features sharp, expressions locked in something that wasn't quite peace. The Varric High Command debated for months, but the conclusion was inevitable. If the humans had left behind such technology, it would belong to the Empire. If these were survivors of some ancient calamity, they would awaken and be made to serve. It was a simple decision, backed by the confidence of an empire that had never known true fear. The first chamber was opened. A single human stood in the light for the first time in what must have been thousands of years. His skin was covered in frost, his breath slow. Then his eyes opened, and everything changed. The alarms rang across the excavation site, a shrill warning that something had gone terribly wrong. The human, still sluggish from whatever deep sleep had held him, moved with a speed no Varric could match. The security teams barely had time to react before their weapons were ripped from their hands. In moments, they were dead. By the time the second chamber was opened, the first human had already disappeared into the facility's depths. The soldiers sent after him never reported back. The High Command was contacted. Reinforcements were sent, none returned. It took hours before they realized what was happening. The humans were not waking up at random. They were being woken up by each other. One after another, the chambers unlocked, the frozen figures inside stepping forward, their eyes scanning the world they had been returned to. There were no words spoken. There was no need. The moment their feet touched the ground, they understood. The war had never ended, and they had work to do. The first fleet arrived within a day. The Varric were no fools. Their initial losses were unacceptable, but they had the numbers. A full planetary siege was launched. The skies filled with warships, each one capable of levelling cities with a single bombardment. The order was given. The planet burned. For 6 days the bombardment continued. Firestorms raged across the surface. The ancient structures were reduced to rubble. The excavation site was annihilated. Nothing could have survived. The High Command declared victory. And then, on the 7th day, the human ships appeared. They did not arrive through any means the Varric understood. There was no warp signature, no hyperspace disturbance. One moment, the fleet stood unchallenged. The next, the humans were there. Their ships were unlike anything in the Varick databases, sleek, angular, moving with a precision that should have been impossible. They did not send messages. They did not demand surrender. They did not ask for mercy. They simply opened fire. The first engagement lasted 13 minutes. By the time it was over, the Varick flagship was gone, its remains tumbling through space. The rest of the fleet followed, torn apart by weapons that cut through shielding like it wasn't even there. The remaining ships fled, but the humans did not pursue. They had already moved on. Every outpost that. It had touched the excavation site. What was next? Communications fell silent. Supply lines disappeared. The Varick Empire, once invincible, suddenly found itself at war with something they had no defense against. Because the humans had not simply returned. They had awakened. And now they remembered. Aboard the command bridge of one of the last human warships, a soldier stared at the incoming fleet. His uniform was tattered, a relic of an age lost to time. He did not speak. The others around him did not need orders. The war had never ended. It was only now that the enemy understood. The Varick homeworld received its first message in days. It was a simple transmission. No threats, no declarations of war. Just a statement. You should have let us sleep. The sky above the capital turned dark. The first impact struck before the Varick High Command could react. The shield generators, thought to be impenetrable, flickered once before failing completely. Across the capital, sirens blared. Civilian transports desperately tried to flee, pushing against one another in the chaos. The planetary defense grid, a marvel of Varick engineering, powered up in response to the attack. It had repelled invaders before. It had crushed rebellions. It had never failed. It lasted 4 minutes. The human fleet moved in a way that defied all known tactics. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement. The ships darted between defense stations, weaving through missile barrages as though they had already calculated every possible outcome. They did not just target strategic locations, they dismantled them. Orbital platforms exploded, one after another. Defensive batteries were cut off before they could coordinate fire. The Varick Command Center was sending out orders, but it made no difference. By the time a new defensive formation was arranged, the humans had already adjusted, already adapted. The Varick did not understand. How could they? They had awakened an army that had fought before their ancestors had even learned to harness fire. They had waged war against the architects of destruction, against forces that no longer even existed in the galactic record. They had perfected war in ways no species should have. And then they had been put to sleep. The final human ship broke formation and accelerated toward the atmosphere, piercing through the clouds at impossible speeds. On board, a single soldier stood in the dropship bay, gripping the handrails as the heat from re-entry washed over the hull. His armour bore no insignia, no markings of rank or name. There was no need. They were all the same now. The doors opened. He stepped into the war. The streets of the Varick capital were chaos. Civilians fled through the alleys as the first human landed in the city centre, the force of impact cracking the metal streets beneath him. He did not pause to adjust. He moved. Varick soldiers rushed to meet him, their plasma rifles humming as they took aim. The first shot lanced through the air, a brilliant red streak that should have reduced the human to nothing. It missed. Not because the soldier was slow, not because his aim was poor, but because the human had already moved before he fired. The next second, the Varick's weapon was torn from his grasp. The next, his entire squad was gone. Not killed. Gone. Thrown aside, broken, tossed into walls with a force that shattered their armour like it was brittle glass. The human continued forward. More soldiers arrived, setting up barricades, deploying drones, anything to slow him down. They shouted orders, trying to establish firing lanes. But it did not matter, because he had seen this before. Every tactic, every movement, it was predictable. He remembered, A flash of movement, a rifle ripped from the hands of an officer, turned, fired back before the others could react. A drone swiped out of the sky, smashed into a transport to block the only escape route. A single soldier, surrounded by 50 enemies, cutting through them like they weren't even there. And he was not alone. More human ships descended, each one releasing soldiers into the fray. They did not speak. They did not coordinate in ways the Varric could intercept. They just moved. Buildings collapsed as war machines from an age-long lost activated once more. Tanks that had not seen battle in eons rolled through the streets, their weapons vaporizing entire columns of defenders. The resistance crumbled, retreating deeper into the city, toward the High Command's fortress. It would not matter. On the far side of the planet, Varric military leaders huddled in a war room deep underground, their faces tense as the battlefield reports came in. "The capital is compromised," one of them said, his claws digging into the metal table. "We need to evacuate the command center before they—" He never finished. The room shook. A tremor, deeper than anything caused by orbital bombardment, rippled through the underground base. Lights flickered. The floor buckled. The Varric did not understand what was happening. But then the screens changed. They showed the fortress exterior, the towering gates that had stood for centuries, the last barrier between the human assault and the ruling body of the Empire. And the gates were collapsing, not from a missile strike, not from explosives, but from one man. A single human stood before the reinforced walls, his hands gripping the metal like it was paper. He pulled. The gate, a structure meant to withstand any siege, bent inward, shrieking under the strain. It cracked. The sheer force of one soldier tore apart what should have been invincible. The metal twisted. The gate snapped. And then he stepped inside. The remaining Varric guards inside the war room could only watch in horror as their final defences fell. "This is impossible," one of them whispered. "No being should—" The doors blasted open. The first human stepped through, his presence silent. Weapons were raised, orders were shouted, and nothing happened. The human stared. And in that moment the Varric realized something even worse than their defeat. The humans were not angry. There was no vengeance in their eyes, no hatred in their movements. They were not here for revenge. They were here because it was necessary, because the war had never ended, because they had been made for this. Outside, the city burned. The Varric fleet, the Empire's final hope, prepared to launch from the planet's surface, their ships scrambling to escape. But the sky was no longer theirs. The human fleet descended, engines roaring as they pursued the last remnants of the species that had dared to wake them. Aboard the lead warship, the commander gave no orders. He simply waited. There was nowhere for them to go. The galaxy belonged to the humans once more, and they were not going back to sleep. The Varric High Command stood frozen, their claws twitching as they stared at the human who had just torn their fortress doors apart. The silence was heavier than any sound of war. The humans did not move like conquerors, nor did they sneer like tyrants. They simply stood, waiting. The highest-ranking Varric in the room swallowed hard and stepped forward. His voice, usually steady, shook. What do you want?" The human, his armour streaked with battle, his stance relaxed yet unshakable, took a slow step forward. "You woke us." The Varric leader straightened, searching for arrogance, for defiance, anything he could work with. But there was nothing. No anger, no pride, only purpose. "That was a mistake," the Varric admitted. The human nodded once. "Yes." The leader clenched his jaw. "Then why not just kill us? You've already destroyed our defences, taken our cities. End it." Another step forward. The air thickened. "You don't understand," the human said quietly. "We were not built for mercy." The Varric flinched as the human raised a hand, not in a fist, not holding a weapon, but in a gesture of inevitability. "We were built for war." The last Varric fleet fled into deep space, engines burning at maximum thrust. They had no plan, no destination. There was only survival now. Their empire was gone, their homeworld had fallen, and behind them, chasing them through the void, was the shadow of their own mistake. The humans. They did not chase for sport. They did not send messages. They pursued. The Varric commanders screamed orders, demanded jumps to hyperspace. But it did not matter. The humans always found them. They never stopped. On the bridge of the final Varric battleship, the last warlord of a fallen race pressed a shaking claw against the control panel, opening a direct channel. He took a breath and spoke. "We surrender." For a long moment, the humans did not respond. Then, through the static, came a voice. Calm, precise, absolute. No. The connection cut. The war was over. The humans had won. But they did not claim the Varric cities. They did not sit upon thrones or carve their names into conquered worlds. They did not demand tribute or enslave the defeated. They simply moved on. Across the galaxy, ancient stations blinked back to life. Warships, dormant for thousands of years, roared back into the black. The scattered remnants of the past gathered. The galaxy watched in silence. They had woken the humans. And now, the humans remembered who they were. They were not builders. They were not conquerors. They were the thing that ended wars. And this war was only the beginning.